For this afternoon and tonight, a significant winter storm, including heavy snow with limited trainings.
Hello and welcome to the SnowBrains podcast, where it's my job to interview the most intelligent people in the snow sports industry and pass their fascinating knowledge on to you, our listeners. I'm your host, Miles Clark. I'm a professional free skier, a mountain guide, an Alaska Heli-Ski guide, a UC Berkeley molecular cell biology graduate, the founder and CEO of SnowBrains. And the guest I'm about to interview fully buried me in snow in Valdez, Alaska last year. He buried me and told me to put myself into the mindset of having been fully buried in an avalanche that I was going to die in. I remained buried for 15 minutes, with snow burning my face and my mind jolting wildly from panic to wanting to explode out of the snow to finally a deep calm and acceptance. It was one of the most profound experiences of my life, my first ritual death ceremony. And I'll never forget it. This episode of the SnowBrains podcast is brought to you by Club Med. Are you ready for an unforgettable ski getaway that takes care of everything? And I mean everything. Head to one of Club Med's mountain resorts where you can experience the thrill of the slopes without worrying about a thing. With their all-inclusive packages, you'll get all your lift tickets, ski passes, ski and snowboard lessons for all ages and ski levels, delicious meals, exciting après-ski activities, and even childcare for the kids, all included in the price. So you can focus on what matters most, carving perfect turns and enjoying the breathtaking views. Visit www.clubmed.us or call 1-800-CLUB-MED or call your travel advisor to book your ski escape today. My guest today is Harlan Sheppard. Harlan has been a heli-ski guide in Alaska for 25 years. He's also been a ski patroller at Stevens Pass, Washington. Harlan is an Avalanche course instructor. He's been working for Washington Department of Transportation and the Avalanche Department for over 12 years, and is currently the Avalanche supervisor for the North Central region of Washington State. Harlan is also a deeply mindful person who has studied the hero's journey and has put a lot of time and energy into mindfulness and its positive consequences. Hello, Harlan. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. How are you, man?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Miles. Thanks for having me.
I'm stoked to have you on here. So today, Harlan, I really want to dig into your impressive heli-ski guide career, your highway career, and then your personal growth awareness, which is what really caused this conversation. And we'll get a little more into that moving forward. And I thought we'd start with your just quick and dirty life story. This is something I do with all the people I hire at SnowBrains. I tell them my life story, have them tell me theirs. I think it's a really cool way to connect with people, figure out where they're coming from, where they're headed. So if you're okay with that, I would love to hear your quick and dirty, 3-minute-ish life story. If it goes longer than that, that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I grew up in outside of Eugene, Oregon, up the McKenzie River. My parents were kind of hippies, and we would go spend a lot of time in the woods. Start out like bushwhack skiing on little wooden cross country skis and clister and wax and wool knickers. And in the summers, they were. My dad was a guide out on the Middle Fork of the Salmon River in the summer. So grew up kind of doing family trips on the Middle Fork and bushwhack skiing. At a certain point, I think I was 7, we moved into Eugene, and shortly thereafter, I went downhill skiing for the first time, and I was like, well, why am I walking up these hills, And so my dad...
really quick, what's bushwhack skiing? I love that term.
It's just like there's no, the modern Nordic skiing is like pretty manicured, right? And so bushwhack skiing is just going out like logging roads, and there's a little hill, on the side of the logging road, and you climb up the hill and slide down it, and
Nice.
Yeah. So just out and about, right? Yeah. I started alpine skiing, and I was like, wow, walking up the hill kind of sucks, and my parents were pretty dedicated to taking us skiing, and it was a long drive, but we'd go skiing on the weekends, and grew up skiing at Mount Bachelor a lot, and Hoodoo and Willamette Pass. followed a girl to Colorado, and she dumped me, and so I moved to Winter Park. That was pretty interesting. And
Nice, classic story.
Yeah, she dumped me for a frat guy.
Oh no.
It was great. Because then I just turned into a ski bum, you know. But I ended up eventually going back to school in Fort Collins out there and tooling all over Colorado. When I left there, I was like, I'm going to drive to Alaska. And I didn't really know anything about Alaska, but I drove across the border into Nelson, BC. And I was like, why am I driving to Alaska? You know, so
this place is great.
Yeah, I ended up staying there and, kind of got my first start on just introduction to bigger mountain skiing. And there was a gentleman there, Tim Ripple, who was a mountain guide who took me under his wing a little bit. And he would show me videos and slides from, Alaska and from, he was a Himalaya guide and, kind of take me out and help me out with reading the conditions and stuff like that. And so that inspired me to that spring. I think it was 91, spring of 92.
How old were you?
Late 20s.
Okay.
Yeah, I was inspired to go up to Alaska and check it out after seeing all these videos and stuff. And so went up there and in the spring of 92, rolled into Thompson Pass. And, it was like late spring. It was kind of had been melted out. And I remember going into, I'm like, oh, I'm here, this is a place the movies talk about, right?
Mm-hmm.
I walked into the Santa Lodge, which was like it was like a shack back then with a pool table. And
yeah,
and there were a couple people in there, and they were like, who is this greenhorn? So, I tooled around and skied, just went ski touring around the pass and over by Turnagain Arm, and but then returned back up there later on. So I started like in the professional ski world was 94. I started ski patrolling at Stevens Pass.
Mm-hmm. In Washington?
In Washington, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
it was great. There was a huge amount of turnover when I got there, and my buddy's like, yeah, they're hiring anybody. And I was like, well, hey,
I'm anybody.
And there was a lot of anarchy. And so there was like people who wanted to sit in the bumps and wait for people to get hurt. And then there was the whole group that just wanted to ski. And you could guess which group I was in. So
the latter.
Yeah. But, ski patrolling was like just such an awesome, it was like a paid internship into like learning about avalanches and learning about high angle rescue and patient assessment and lots of different, lift evac, whatever, working with a team and just getting paid, to go skiing and work on these skills, And,
that's the dream, man.
Yeah. But it is also pretty evident that like, it's not necessarily the road to longevity in terms of, knee and back and like the skiing icy moguls at the end of the day is with a toboggan or something, hats off to the men and women who are doing that. So I was like, I want to ski powder, So I started, getting my courses and certs together and so that I could go back up to Alaska and went back up there and flew into Valdez. I knew a couple of people, but I didn't have, and had sent out some resumes, but I didn't have a car. I just got off, hitchhiked into town, found a room, and I'd hitchhike up to the pass every day and just go touring.
In Valdez.
In Valdez, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually, it was 1998, I believe. And it was pretty amazing time because like you could ski a lot more than with the helicopter actually touring, like the weather windows weren't as critical and you could go, I don't know. It seemed like it was a little more freedom than the helicopter, although the helicopter is pretty good too. But one morning I was hitchhiking and Dean Cummings and his crew picked me up. They're like, hey, do you have a transceiver? I was like, yeah. And they drove me to the airport and we flew up and over. And at that time they were about 17 mile. And they're like, yeah, one of the guys from heli camps broke his leg yesterday. You should go talk to him.
Oh, wow.
And so they dropped me off at 17 Mile, and I walked up to 19 Mile and got a job.
Got a job as a heli-ski guide.
Well, they were doing snowcat skiing there as well. And so I started out, snowcat skiing for a couple of weeks, and then it worked pretty quickly into heli skiing.
Wow.
Yeah. The boss, I don't know, I guess he liked me, but some of the other guides were like, again, like, who the fuck is this guy? And the language, like they were not impressed because I wasn't from Jackson Hole or from Crested Butte or wherever it was, all their buddies were from. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was interesting. Working for Valdez Heli-Ski camps, we ended up, having a couple of helicopters. I think the busiest we got was like 60 people in the field with like 4 ships. And
whoa!
I worked into forecasting and being lead guide, and it was a really steep learning curve, as from being in Alaska.
Oh yeah,
great group of folks. After that, met a girl, got married. We moved up into the mountains, up the Icicle Canyon, and built a little cabin in the woods.
And where is that?
It's outside of Leavenworth.
Okay, in Washington. Got it.
In Washington, yep. And so continued to work in the mountains, mostly, a couple of weeks in the spring, and mechanized guiding, snowcat skiing or ski touring, and instructing. I was actually just like further exploring like different career opportunities, because there's only so much you can do in the ski world, I guess. And came across opportunity to start working for the highway. And for the last 12 years, I've been working for the highway. And
you're avalanche forecasting for them?
Yes. Yep.
That's cool.
Yeah. So it's north central Washington. So we're responsible for Stevens Pass, US 2, and Tumwater Canyon, and then North Cascades Highway over Highway 20.
Wow.
And then we advise on Mount Baker Highway.
Whoa. Yeah. How many avalanche pass on 2 and 20?
So combined, we have about 140, I think.
Ooh.
Yeah. And, not all of them, some of them are on a 30-year return interval, but a lot of, there's some regular performers for sure.
Gosh, that's amazing.
Oh yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting work, in this phase too, has been just, raising family and now I can get out and go, for a couple weeks back to Alaska. That's where we met last year. It's great. Working for Pulse Line. But it's a lot of skiing with my son or my daughter and doing other things as well. So
that is incredible, Harlan. I love the life story. I love the direction that you went with the heli skiing and working for the road, avalanche forecasting. I think you're certified to the gills. It's really interesting to spend time with you because you have so much knowledge in Alaska, in forecasting avalanches, in avalanche terrain. I learned a lot from just spending a very small amount of time with you, and I'd like to do more. But the first thing we got to do is the Alaska Heli-Ski guiding. So you kind of mentioned that you first got into it in 1998. And I'm so curious, what was it like back then? And how would you contrast it to today? How's it different today than it was back then?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it just gets me excited still thinking about it. But, I grew up watching TGR movies and just being like, oh, wow. Right. Like the first time I saw The Harvest, I was like, what is going on? I got to check this out, So, going up there, I would say the first thing, it's still just as big, right? Like you get out there and you think you've skied some mountains, you think you've been in some terrain, and like it is just so big and kind of humbling, right? Like what I was reading Silverton Avalanche School, like nature bats last or something like that, and like man, that's the big leagues, right? So yeah. I would say some things that have changed is it's more crowded.
Even with the helicopters, even in the deep backcountry.
Yeah. There's just more people, more, you never saw, like this last year, there were snowmobile tracks
Everywhere.
just
Anywhere.
going for miles. And then,
dedicated.
So impressive, right?
Yeah.
Those guys are like 3 days walk.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And not just like a single track, but highways. So, and it's great, seeing people get out there, and it's still huge, right? And there's just more helis in the corridor there. I mean, everybody wants to ski powder. Historically, it was pretty hard to ski powder with 210, long, straight, skinny skis, 65 mils underfoot or whatever. It's like, there was only a select group of people skiing powder. And
right.
So that technology, it's pretty cool. I keep getting older, and it keeps getting easier to ski.
The skis have made it so much easier.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Yeah. So, and then the amount of, I think some of the safety innovations have definitely improved. There was a little bit last year and the last couple of years where it was like almost too much doodads and radios and in reaches and communicate with this and check in there and log this. And it's like, whoa, I'm just like trying to pay attention to where I'm going and where my clients are going.
Well, and what was it like in 98? I mean, probably, beacon and a radio.
Yeah. I mean, it was beacon and a radio, and like, if the pilot could get up high and hit base, he would do that. There was no check-in at the top and bottom of every run, There was, maybe check-in at lunch or when he went back to get fuel.
Right.
Yeah. So, but, good pilots then, A-stars, the whole works. When I started, Era Aviation was running, and they ran a really tight ship, and we had great pilots. It was a little more exploring. I think, not everything had been skied out or everything had been skied, and
it must have felt more raw back then.
Yeah, it seemed like it. Yeah. I mean, it's still pretty raw, right?
Yeah.
And every year is different, the way the snow loads in these places. And I mean, pretty similar.
Very cool, man. And I feel like when I talk to the guides who've been up there for a long time, it's just cool to hear the experiences, the things that they did. Maybe they pushed a little more when they were younger. So what might be the wildest or most challenging thing you've skied in Alaska?
Well, there's one year I came back. It was like right after my daughter was born, and my friend Dan Vandermeulen and Gabe, they were both working for Dean, and
this Dean Cummings, who had H2O.
H2O, yeah, and they're like, come on up, and so I came up, and I was working with Dean, and we had a private group for a week, and
nice.
Dean was amazing mountain guide, like super solid in the mountains. But he definitely was like, we had 2 clients, and I was tail guiding for him, and we were going around, and he was giving them a good show, right? And taking them to some really exposed places. And I remember one of them was like, I lowered him and the 2 clients into this slope, and he's like,
whoa, with a rope.
Yeah. And he's like, whoa. Oh yeah. He's like, you should be fine. It's pretty good. Just grab the rope and go. And it's like, okay, and it's like, it was definitely like the test, right? The Dino test.
Love it, man. What a
he was pretty funny. So that was somewhere, I don't know, that was back up in the White Room there, but I had a couple interesting runs down Meteorite. I mean, that was always pretty scary up there on that.
Why do you think Meteorite's scary?
Just one of the times it was pretty firm, right? Like if you fell, you weren't going to stop.
Could you describe Meteorite for us?
It's like a pretty long ramp, 2,500 vert ramp, low 50s at the top at the breakover.
Steepness,
yeah, 50 degrees. And it's kind of got a convex rollover at the top, so you can't see the slope. So that's pretty interesting. Valdez is like that a lot with those rollovers where you can't see, and then you get out on the slope. So it's that anticipation. You're like, yikes. but yeah, has a couple of little spines in there. There's the dragon's back or the devil's backbone or whatever they call that.
Mm-hmm.
But really fun run, in good snow conditions. But one time we skied it where it was not that great, and boy, howdy, it was. I was puckered. You did not want to blow a turn,
Oof, you'd be a long ride.
And that, I think that was the biggest experience in Alaska is, it highlights it's such a conditioned sport, because sometimes, 45-degree slope is terrifying. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes 55-degree slope is glorious, right? Like, and knowing when to be in those places and when not to is really key, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Everybody comes there and wants to ski something gnarly, because, well, not everybody, but
a lot of clients do, though. Yeah, they have a picture. They have a picture in their head for sure. A little bit of a tangent. So Dean Cummings is still around. If people don't know, he was charged with murder recently and ended up being exonerated. So he's a free man, but he does seem to have a different mental state than he may have had in the past. But so what was it like working and skiing with Dean? What was it like? What's he like?
Well, so when I worked for heli camps, he was like he was down the road, and I would hear his stories.
Mm-hmm.
And
what kind of stories?
Well, I mean, on the positive, like that guy probably skied and guided consistently more than anybody else in Valdez's history, and skied more first descents and more runs than anybody else. I would say that, maybe Jerry Hance, but
Mm-hmm.
Jerry also didn't have a heli company where he could go out and
do whatever he wants.
And he was still going big in his, late 40s and 50s and still filming, with the crews. And so just so impressive. Unfortunately, I would say from, what I experienced and was that his ability to mentor or pass that knowledge on to other folks was kind of broke down in his communication skills.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, amazing mountain guide. And he was nothing but respectful for me, other than, testing me that one time.
Well, you had to jump 12 feet or something like that to get in there. Gosh,
it was a little sporty, but
yeah.
So I hope, I wish him the best.
Me too.
For whatever journey he's on. So.
Absolutely. Me too. And really, maybe one of the best Alaska skiers of all time. I mean, if not the best, right? Because a lot of people have shown up and done great, but to do it year after year, decade after decade, like Dean did, is very impressive. So cool. Well, thank you for telling us that. So one thing that I thought was really interesting. Let's start with this. What does it take? Like, how does one heli-ski guide in Alaska? What are the biggest challenges of guiding people in that really heavy terrain?
Yeah, like you said, a lot of people have shown up and tried it, and there is a certain amount of, Alaska is just a different level of assumed risk. It's different than the heli skiing in Canada. It's different than the European ski guiding, and so you have to be comfortable with that level of risk and the level of uncertainty, like not everything's mapped out, and not all the runs are like, here's where you regroup, here's where you do this, right? And so, maybe it's blind foolishness or competence and confidence to like step into that, right? It certainly helps to, I would encourage anybody who wants to get into that guiding world up there is to, just show up there and go ski touring for a season. And climb around and, because that's the other part that we know about is it's a different pace, right? And,
so fast.
You might get 15 to 30 seconds to look at a 4,000-foot run that you've never skied before. And you got to figure out where you are and where you want to be and where you want your folks to be. And, where the no falls, the danger zones are or whatnot. And then you land on top and it looks totally different.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So
my biggest tool now is my phone. I get over it, get a really good look, take a few photos. So I can only imagine back in 98, before you guys had a quick camera like that, instantly gave you an image, must have been much more challenging, because there's a lot of times where I'm literally on top, mapping it out, showing the picture to my clients, explaining things with my phone, which I thought has just been an invaluable tool.
Yeah, and having the run tracks in the phone and on Gaia and different things is super helpful as well. And it cuts down on the Hobbs time too. You're not just flying around looking for a place to land always. But yeah, I mean, the filmers back in the day, they had the Polaroids, right? So they
I've seen that. You see the athletes in the movie on top looking at a Polaroid going, gosh, I think this is where I'm at. Right. Even the Polaroids aren't as good as our digital, where we could zoom in and move it around and take a zillion pictures and check them all.
Yeah. I kind of lean towards the low tech, high mind though, if you're relying on a lot of electronics and you might miss some of the nuance and the details. I mean, I think it's just a good exercise and
absolutely
firing the neurons. Yeah. I see a lot of people following phones through the woods and and it's like, if you look up and look at rocks and look at trees and look at mountains and look back when you're going forward, but nothing like whiteout navigation with a phone though, or a GPS.
Yes, but there is something really factual in what you're saying, because I really noticed it in my recent experience. And I moved out here to Utah about 5 years ago, and I use my phone to navigate when I'm driving, and I still don't know how to get anywhere. So of late, the last year or so, I'm like, all right, I'm going to turn the phone off. I might make a couple wrong turns, but I'm just going to figure this out. And it's amazing how much better my mental map is now since I got rid of that. So yeah, that's definitely something I need to start practicing more in Alaska too, because just knowing it and seeing it and understanding it, rather than looking at a phone and having it interpreted for you, it doesn't put it straight into your neural network, like actually learning the physicality of it.
Yeah, a good tool, but maybe not the primary one.
Exactly. And I think it's really interesting that, it's 2023 now. You've been guiding up there since 98, but you took a break from Alaska heli-skiing when you had small children, and then you came back to Alaska. And you wanted to do things differently. We were talking about this before this podcast. And I'm curious, what did you do differently when you had that realization?
Having kids and, it definitely gave me the opportunity to grow up a little bit more. All of a sudden I wasn't like just doing my selfish pursuits. I'm actually like responsible for some other people. And
yeah, here we go.
And then the other part of it is like, if I'm going to take time away from my family and go on, like I think of it as kind of like that hero's journey. You leave home, you go on an adventure, you meet allies, you encounter, demons or darkness or light or whatever. And then you return home and, it's so important to bring that energy back home. Right. And so my wife saw that early on, was like, oh yeah, you need to go, because when you come home, you're so alive. Right.
Oh,
and on any adventure, right? Like, we think we have this idea where we think it's selfish to pursue these things, but it's actually pretty vital to bring us alive, because the world needs more people who are alive. Right. And if we're not serving ourselves, we can't be of service to anybody else. And so, I wanted to bring that same energy into guiding and just doing it differently, and not just like, oh, I got to ski the steepest gnarly things and do all the, go here and go there. It's like, no, I want to go up there, make connections with neat people. The heli guiding clientele and guide staff are some of the most interesting people from around the world that you could ever meet.
Definitely.
And, you start having real conversations, not just about like your bindings or something. And it opens up, and then you're in this amazing, one of the most beautiful places on the planet.
Yes.
To absorb that as well, So it's got all the ingredients, and you're doing something that brings you joy most of the time, right? And so you got all the ingredients for, a really lived experience that you can share with other people. And one of the things that helps with that is slowing down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So the first time I came back and I was like, I went to Haynes, and it was pretty cool. I was shout out to Lindsay Dyer, who was doing a unicorn camp. And so my first group is, Lindsay and the unicorn camp. And, we skied around and we got down to the bottom and they were talking about something. And I threw out some Joseph Campbell quote. And from there, it was just like game on, it was just, we were doing, yoga and dance parties on top of mountains and,
Nice.
burning sage in the woods while we're waiting for the helicopter and having, counsels about life
Nice.
and the circumstances just kind of aligned with setting that new intention, right? Like, I would have just really interesting in-depth conversations with other clients from other groups or in my next groups. So I think it has been pretty interesting to go back and the other part is, I have had quite a few different, experiences with snow and avalanches in the mountains that I can share with the clients and with the guide staff as well, and try to pass some of that, some of the knowledge that's been handed down to me, either, from nature or from other folks. So,
and we're going to get more into that too moving forward, because I do want to hear your stories on that. But I feel like this is a great segue to your personal growth journey. I was guiding with you in Alaska in April this year, and you buried me in snow. You buried me to simulate what it was like to die in an avalanche. And we did it with a bunch of other team members too, and other team members helped bury us. And it was extremely powerful. It was one of the most profound experiences I've ever had in my life. And I don't even want to say more about it because I want to hear your thoughts. Everyone involved was moved, and everyone involved was moved to tears at some point. And so let's just start with, why did we do that burial exercise, and where did that ceremony come from, and what was the goal?
We started that day with our experience confidence graph. And so we had like this, people would draw a line of, confidence was the vertical axis and experience was the horizontal axis. And they'd draw on the line and they'd talk us through their experiences in the mountains. And so each person kind of highlighted, where, they gained confidence, where they lost confidence, as they gain more experience over time. And so that kind of preloads it. And where this came out of is, years of avalanche education, and realizing that I was questioning how much of a service we were doing to all the students by how we taught avalanche consequence.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the standard model of teaching avalanche consequence is like, oh, if you have an avalanche, you do companion rescue, right? So get out
no problem.
beepy electronic device, pull your airbag, woo, off we go, right? And or we study a case study, and so we're third party removed. So like, if anybody who's listening, if you like have had an avalanche experience, or you've been involved or know someone who's having an avalanche experience, if you like close your eyes for 5 seconds,
mm-hmm.
and feel what that feels like in your body, just feel that visceral feeling, that's what I wanted to create, was an experience where people could have a near miss, visceral experience without losing somebody or without losing their, getting injured or killed themselves. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because many of us have, if you're in the mountains long enough, you're going to know somebody, or you're going to experience the consequence of it yourself, and then the idea is, there's another whole part of it that I can dive into in a little bit, but, and that's that, ritual practice of death that many cultures have had over the years. Right.
I think that's so interesting. So yeah, I demand we talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. So, so preloaded the team just for context for people. And then we went outside and we did a companion rescue, and everybody thought they were doing a rescue training. And then, statistically, depending on what statistics you're looking at, there's a fairly large, 30 to 40% of the people who are fully buried actually die, right?
Wow.
It's not companion rescue.
Right.
And that's not including trauma, right? And so, statistically, it's really dangerous if you get caught in an avalanche, obviously.
Yes.
So, we did our little companion rescue drill, and then, bringing in that, statistic, but also asking for volunteers to, like, if they want to share in this experience, right? Because it's not something you want to, like, tell somebody they need to do. And this exercise, that I've created and developed over the years, is really good for, like, third year patrollers, experienced mountain travelers, mountain guides, people who have had some experience, right? You wouldn't want to do it with a recreational folks.
Just scare the crap out of them. Yeah, no, I think it's better for people who've been in this industry and have experienced avalanche and avalanche loss.
Yeah, or confidence, right, in that experience level where they haven't seen the consequences. Yeah, we don't want anybody to sit on the couch playing video games because of this experience.
Right.
But anyway, so we give the people the option of basically digging their own grave, and not super deep and leaving big blocks. So you have an airspace, but
you are fully buried, and it's intense.
Are fully buried. Yeah. And, the preload is that, like, have people say their obituary, and it's real interesting what people say going into it and what the vibe is, or what people say when they're coming out of it. But, part of it is, so dig their grave, which is a powerful experience in itself. And then talk with an ally for a couple of minutes on what, this means to you and your life. And then share something with the group. And then we bury those people, and buried you, and leaving, a little bit of airspace. But, the weight of the snow, and you're in the cold, you're under the snow. And then the goal of everybody who's on the outside, who's not buried, is to hold it and observe, to witness that suffering, or, as if it's real, and to hold that space as if it's a sacred, like, it really is happening, right? Because it is, in some ways there's deaths of ego, there's deaths of something going on in there, right?
Yes.
Or remembering of other experiences, right? And so it's not a competition who can stay in the longest, but people come out at their own different pace, and then what gets, like you said, what gets shared afterwards tears me up every time, right? I mean, it's amazing to hear people's stories, and to witness, like the universal suffering of humans, right? I mean, everybody's experienced some trauma, and some of us more than others, and
life is suffering.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been a useful exercise for some folks, and I've enjoyed facilitating, and particularly that session was quite powerful.
I thought the same time. I am curious how many of these you've done over the years, and for how many years you've been doing it. And ours felt very powerful. Everybody was crying. The stories that people told. So essentially, when we came out of being buried, we then would share in a circle what we experienced. And everybody's experience is so heavy, because you go to these really interesting places in your mind that you don't ever go to. And that, when you're buried like that, and you're going through this sensation and ideology that this is it. I'm dying now in this avalanche, and what are my last thoughts? And it's really profound to see what those last thoughts are, and really fascinating to see what other people's last thoughts are. And a lot of stuff is similar. Nobody's talking about hate. Everybody's talking about love. Almost everybody, even just right now, I'm getting a strong emotional reaction. Everybody's just talking and sharing about who they love, why they love them, what would be the last thing they would want to share with that person, what the last things they remember about that person or people is. And it's really a neat grounding and communal thing, because I think we all connect when we have that talk with all each other, that, oh, wow, we all are really similar. We all basically just went directly to love, directly to our loved ones. And I don't want to pigeonhole everybody, but that's what I remember the most, was just this overwhelming feeling of love. And that's kind of what, God and the universe and the Almighty and the Creator, in my eyes, a lot of times kind of just is love, right? It's this powerful force that connects us, and kind of connects all things, right? You see animals experience it, you see it everywhere. And so, yeah, and I thought it was really interesting, the sage. You were burning sage, and tell us, why do you burn sage? I thought that was a really powerful piece.
Well, I mean, you can burn sage or incense or different things, and different cultures have different beliefs. And I don't want to like speak for other cultures, but what I've learned from one of my mentors was that it's good to have a practice of burning incense or sage in your practice, and that it's also really helpful for when people are passing, to, if you have an opportunity to sit with someone who's passing, to burn incense, because there are folks who say that the last sense to go is our sense of smell. And so if it's a familiar sense, it can help people, move to, the next, whatever happens after we're here. Right. And then it's also, sage is like, it's really cleansing of energy, and, like people are always smudging people, and, there's all kinds of beliefs and ideas around it. And I think it is, it can move energy, and it can clear energy as well. So, yeah.
I found that a really powerful piece to it, that that a lot of cultures think the last sense to go is your sense of smell, and burning the sage and smelling the sage, and having it in our circle. And when each person shared their experience from being buried, they held the sage in their hand, which I thought was really powerful as well.
I think that and this is just kind of coming to me, but I think that I would recommend mountain guides have some sage in their first aid kit.
Oh,
because we're going to have experiences that are, going to be powerful in the mountains. And, for instance, I carry sage with me in my hunting pack, right, in my kill kit. And so when I, like take an animal, it's like I'm burning sage and offering them that, as, that offering, right? And I think that it's part of that, psychological first aid in our first aid kit, that it could be pretty useful to throw a little chunk of sage in your first aid kit. That's just my thoughts.
Well, yeah. And then, but extrapolate for us. When would a mountain guide burn the sage?
So one of the things that I think is really important in communicating in high risk environments is to be able to clear things and move, right? So if there's tension in the group, which can be really good, right? Like you don't want everybody to just agree on everything all the time, because we want to have dissenters to share their opinions, right? But those conversations can get tense, and can, that tension is palatable, right? So it can be real important to do an exercise where, especially with like expeditions or teams where they're working together along, having some sort of ritual practice where you can say what pissed you off or what hurt you, and you can clear that and move on, right?
Right.
And sage would be a good thing for that. If someone had a near miss that scared the shit out of them, having, using that sage to clear that space, even using it just as a tactical pause to like, hey, let's just take a minute. We'll burn a little sage. We're enjoying nature, coming together as a group, right?
I like that.
How cool is that, right?
Because I thought it really gives you pause, which is something we need more of in the mountains, right? So you kind of take a pause, like, oh, all right, I'm going to sort of open my mind here. We're burning the sage. The sage has been handed to me, or I'm handing the sage to someone else. And I think it creates a little focus and pause. So I thought it was really special. So I like that because I got sage growing right outside my house here in Utah. So I'll have to bundle some up and start putting it in my pack.
Yeah. And sometimes, like words just dilute what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you can share sage or some incense burning.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to say anything,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
We know what happened.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that, these type of ceremonies change people. The goal that I think, actually, let's say, what do you think? What is the goal of a ceremony like our burial ceremony? You said it before, but I'm interested in a concise answer. What is the goal of this burial ceremony?
Yeah. So on the level of avalanche education and risk management, it's to give people a visceral experience of what the true consequences of avalanches are without having to have the loss or injury.
Very, very impressive stuff. And something that I think would be, they could teach this in Abbey 1. It doesn't take a ton of time. And the impact from it is long lasting. For me, it was just the snow burning my face and melting and kind of pooling, on little divots in my face. It just burned and it was cold and it was uncomfortable and it was terrible in its own way, right? And it really did just, and you realize I can't move. There's nothing I can do. I can't just clear my face. I can't get more breath. There's nothing I can do here. That helplessness and that idea that, all right, well, this is it. Really, really was profound and really did transcend my thinking on how I'm going to behave in avalanche terrain, on how I want my friends and family to behave in avalanche terrain and more. So I thank you for giving that experience, and I'd like to give it to others and do it again. I think it might be something that needs to be done. And speak really quickly to where you found the cultures that you drew on for this ceremony, because you talked about the ritual practice of, I don't know what the right way to say it is, but the right way to say it, this going through this ceremony of death. Where did you get this idea, and where are these ideas used?
I was introduced to it through a program called the Hero's Journey Foundation, and they do group workshops where it's personal growth and development, and people from around the world come to it. Some of them are co-ed, some of them are all men's or all women's groups. I've done a number of workshops with them, and the ones that were all men were really interesting because learning, the struggles deeper of men. If you put men and women together, it can be different dynamics, right? People keep their masks on or whatever
Definitely.
it is. It's harder to break down those barriers sometimes. But so one of my mentors introduced it to me, is a Joseph Campbell talked about it in A Hero of a Thousand Faces. He went and studied a bunch of different cultures around the world, and before internet and before cell phones and communication, and there were ritual practices that were happening around the world with there was no way they had talked to their neighbors about it in other places and on other islands or other, and so some of these practices like the ritual burial of death and or practicing death. And there's a lot of cultures that have practiced death, like I think the Dalai Lama said, he meditates on death every day so that he can be fully alive. Right.
I like that.
Yeah. So it's just, being aware of this is going to happen. How do we want to be in this world? And, one of the biggest mistakes we can make is think we have a lot of time. Right.
Right.
When I entered into it, like a lot of people, I was working on some issues. So the first time I went through a burial exercise or a ritual, it was pretty profound, and I thought that was pretty interesting. And I came back the next year and I was like, oh, I've really worked on my shit, I'm
all better now.
Yeah, I got this shit dialed, maybe I'll help some other people out. And what I didn't realize was like, like when you start down a path of growth, like it's kind of a lifetime path of growth and discovery, right? You kind of unpeeling the onion, layers of an onion. And, you know, maybe it's not as dramatic or profound or, in what gets brought up, but, we all have room for improvement and to become better humans, is my thoughts at least. Right.
Definitely.
And the second time I was in this group and the facilitator looked at me and he's like, well, you're going to do the burial. And I was like, well, I've already done it. He's like, no, you haven't. And I was walking to the burial with a friend of mine and I just broke down and was like wailing. Like there was so much grief and
Wow.
and law. I don't even, can't even put words to it. Right. But I was just like really crushed. And then I dug my grave and got in, and it was in sand in this big sandbox. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how long I was in there, but so I'm in there and I'm under the sand. And at a certain point, like it became so, maybe it's in your mind, whatever. But this is what happened to me. This was my experience, was like these little dudes came and they're like opened up the back of my chest and pulled my heart out. And they put a new heart in and they said, yeah, all we've got is a silver heart. We don't have a heart of gold today. And I was like, that's what I remembered. And so I woke up and I crawled out of the sand and everybody else was gone. The guy who was supposed to be watching me, he had left.
Oh, wow. You were in there a while.
I was in there a while and I couldn't really talk for about a day and a half.
Really?
And on the last day, they do a thing where it's called this giveaway and people give away things. And this guy gave a guitar to, and I didn't tell anybody about this. I was like, what the is going on here? Right. Like this was reprogramming what my beliefs and stuff. And so last day, this guy gives the facilitator a guitar and he picks up the guitar and he starts playing Keep Me Searching for a Heart of Gold.
Whoa. Yeah. Neil Young.
Whoa. And I was just like, dang, you just can't make that shit up. Right.
No, you can't.
Like, out of all the songs he could have started playing. Right. And so, and they talked about it later on, but it's kind of the death of, whatever needs to burn away. Right. Like we all got stuff that no longer serves us. And, for me, it was parts of my ego that no longer served me. It was parts of my story that I was carrying that no longer served me, and to help us go forward. Right. And that's my idea of enlightenment is it's not like becoming some spiritual guru, but it's in removing some of the heaviness that we're carrying around and some of the baggage and the stories. Right. So we become lighter when we can let some of that stuff go.
And this ritual death experience can help people with that. And and I think help people feel more alive, right? Like getting it stuffed in your face, what it would be like to be dead, sure gives you a lot of motivation to when you realize that, oh no, I'm still alive. I still have another chance. And I think that's a big piece of what you're saying, where you can shed things. It's like, all right, I'm coming out of this burial ritual with a sharper, more finite understanding of what is important in this world and what is important in my life. And I'm ready to make changes. Absolutely. I think that's really what was so powerful about it for me. And I am curious about the Hero's Journey Foundation. I just was reading on their website and I love their goal here is, I'm going to just quote, is to redefine the archetypical role of our hero in our current times, from an idealized superhuman role of savior to a more human posture, one among others, who is more real, more vulnerable, and ultimately a more livable role. And I love that. And so maybe just speak a little bit to the Hero's Journey Foundation, what they do and what their goals are.
Yeah, I think they're one of a number of organizations out there that are working towards positive change, at a person to person level, right? Like we've got these ideas of changing the whole world. Well, it starts with changing yourself, and then you can, maybe influence somebody else, right?
Definitely.
So Michael Mervosh was the founder of the Hero's Journey, amazing psychotherapist, just amazing man who does a lot of work around the world, teaching classes and running these workshops. And then one of the other folks that was real profound in there, that was one of the facilitators for, they had a group, once you had gone for a couple of years, then you could become a steward and help, support the other folks and still work on your stuff. But, you'd cook and set up sweat lodges or set up ceremonies or, do different things behind the scenes. And so I met this guy, Peter Faust, who, we've become lifelong friends, and
Great.
just, he brought in more of the mystical aspects of things and the spiritual aspects of things, and kind of working towards that. Every day we'd work on the physical level, we'd work on the mental level, work on the emotional level, and then work on the spiritual level as well, right? So
everything. And how long are these trips?
they were 8 days.
Wow. Okay.
The
Full on.
stewards would go for about 10 days.
Okay.
Set up and tear down a little bit ahead of time. Some of them were shorter, 3 or 4 days. Yeah. And it's really interesting. I volunteered at this other organization this spring, Heroes and Horses, and out in Montana, and they're working with vets to really help, bring them back into balance. And they're doing 40.
And you're saying veterans of wars.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they're doing 41-day programs.
Wow. That's in depth.
Really, really powerful, not dabbling at all. So yeah, it's pretty neat that there's, and I think that whole discussion of, even in the mountain guiding world and in the avalanche community and the ski community, is way more discussed and shared now of, becoming better humans, mental health, resiliency, all of that. So
one of my number one goals with SnowBrains, and especially this podcast, is to increase awareness around vulnerability. I'm not trying to force it down anybody's throat, but I've found being vulnerable has helped me enormously in my life. And I really want to extend that vulnerability to others. And I've really gotten all my good buddies to do it. We tell each other we love each other all the time now. I stuff it down their face. And sometimes I have to do it for years before they'll be able to say it back. But I know once they say it back that they've been through a journey and that they're now ready to meet that love, and meet that sensation and meet that vulnerability. Because, as Brene Brown has a great vulnerability TED Talk, if you haven't seen it.
Yeah.
And she's talking to a bunch of Navy SEALs, and it's
great.
Just blindside ask them, is there courage without vulnerability? They all sit there, and finally one Navy SEAL raises his hand and just says, no, ma'am. You cannot be courageous without being vulnerable, because otherwise it's nothing, to any kind of gesture or action that doesn't have vulnerability is not courageous, right? Because you haven't risked anything. And that's what it's all about. And I really love the idea of the hero's journey. And I just want to take one step back to where it might come from, at least as far back as I could find it. And you've referred to Joseph Campbell a couple of times. He has a really famous book we all need to read. I still haven't read it, called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And it's actually the book that inspired George Lucas to write Star Wars. George Lucas was in a car accident. He's from Modesto, California, which is actually where I was born, and I have a lot of family there. And when he was in the hospital, he read that book and he started formulating these ideas. And one of the many definitions of the hero's journey, the one I like the most I found in the literature, is this. I'll quote here. The hero's journey is a common narrative archetype or story template that involves a hero who goes on an adventure, learns a lesson, wins a victory with that newfound knowledge, and then returns home transformed, right? And I think all of us want to experience that. And we know that Luke Skywalker does. So I think it's a cool way to kind of bring it into not just pop culture, but something we all can understand and relate. And yeah, I'm curious, what your thoughts are on that sort of that definition of the hero's journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's spot on. It's great. I think, bringing that gift home is that big nugget of like, sharing that energy. So, when you go to Antarctica or South America, or you're doing skiing for 300 days, you're just spreading the stoke, right? Like,
Trying to.
and bringing that stoke into, the coffee shop or into the office or anywhere else, into your life, into your relationships,
Mm-hmm.
that is bringing that gift home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's so important, so.
And my hope is that it might inspire people, right? I actually watched a TED Talk recently that brainwashed me a little, and now when people ask me, well, Miles, nice to meet you. What do you do? And I tell them I inspire people to live more adventurous lives. It's my new answer. And if they want to dig deeper, I could give them, what my job is and whatnot. But it hits people. I see it, when I say it, they have a physical reaction. Their body moves in a way that is not going to normally move, because they're like, well, nobody's ever said that kind of answer before. And it makes me feel good, because it makes me feel like, that's actually what I do. That's really where I'm coming from. Calling all skiers and snowboarders, escape to the snowy peaks of Europe, Japan, China, or Canada with Club Med. Their more than 20 all-inclusive mountain resorts offer unparalleled convenience and endless adventures. Explore world-class ski resorts, indulge in authentic gourmet dining, and unwind with lively après-ski activities. Let Club Med take care of everything, so you can simply relax and enjoy your ski getaway. Visit www.clubmed.us or call 1-800-CLUB-MED or call your travel advisor to discover your ski paradise. I know that the through line with all of what we've been talking about is how this could relate to, we were calling it avalanche professionals, but how it could relate to first responders and avalanche professionals and mountain guides and ski patrollers and these people who live this life and go through these challenging experiences. And I don't want to open it up too broadly, but I think, there's even some parallels between the military and avalanche professionals. And so, with all that in mind, what do you think the through line is here?
Yeah, I mean, I think in all those occupations and endeavors, you're looking at folks who are dealing with uncertainty day in, day out.
Mm-hmm.
And, in that uncertainty, anything is possible, right? But that means anything is possible. And so living in that uncertain world and it can weigh on you or it can free you, right? Like it can be both, right? And so I think that, that's the thread of those occupations is, and then they're pretty high consequence endeavors as well, like what you're exposed to and what you're exposing yourself to and what you're exposing clients to. In some ways it's low probability, high consequence, depending on the venue, right?
And a lot of us in the avalanche world and professions have seen the consequences. And I think that's where, a term is going to come in here, whether we like it or not, that I think does create a through line with, what we were talking about before with, the burial rituals and the hero's journey, and then with the military and it's PTSD, right? Like these people are going through post-traumatic stress disorder because of experiences that they've had in the mountains, because of experiences they've had in the military, because of experiences they've had in life. And so I guess that's somewhere we can start. What do you think? We've mentioned that, I talk about this all the time, that the parallels between the military and we'll just say avalanche professionals and guides are there. They're very strong, I think. Obviously, the military is even stronger. But yeah, what parallels do you think there are between folks in the military and veterans and avalanche professionals?
Yeah, if you're in it long enough, the destructive forces of avalanches can, do similar damage to explosives. If you're in mitigation long enough, I was in a course this fall with a woman who was on a gun crew in Utah last year, and you guys had a huge winter in Utah last year.
Yeah.
And she shot over 400 rounds out of a howitzer, and
whoa,
it gave her, she had to take a couple months off in the spring because she had traumatic brain injuries from those repeated concussions
Oh, wow.
being next to the howitzer. Right. And so,
Right. It's like football, that subconcussive
yeah.
encephalopathy.
And, pro skiers, the same deal, like you're jumping off of stuff from young age and
Mm-hmm.
you're hitting the deck hopefully not
Mm-hmm.
every day, but you're rattling your brain, and those small concussions that we know too as well can lead to that. So between the traumatic brain injuries and then the traumatic events, that we witness or were part of, those parallels with the military, first responders, avalanche professionals are there, the difference is, nobody's shooting back at you when you're shooting
Mm-hmm.
the mountain, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think the long-term effects are legitimate, right? Like there's not a lot of, this will be, what is it? 29 years of, using explosives and mitigating avalanches, right? There's not a lot of people who are staying in the military and exposed to explosives for 29 years,
No,
So the cumulative effects there, I don't feel like
no,
I don't feel like I'm getting smarter.
me neither. And I think that's really interesting because those, all of what you just said are not things I've ever thought about. That's not the answer I expected because, I'm usually balancing this idea of the parallels between military and maybe avalanche professionals is the good side is we have that bond, because we rely on each other to stay alive in the mountains. Like the military, they rely on each other to stay alive in combat. And that bond that's formed there, it's really close to tribalism. The place, some of the places that we were a long time ago, maybe even before, I would argue, yes, before agriculture, the bond that you had with your fellow man, it was like, we are only here together because of each other. Like without each other, we're just going to die out here. And so I know the military fares that way. And it is true in a lot of respects as avalanche professionals, and even just people going backcountry skiing, ski mountaineering, you rely on each other. To take care of each other, make good decisions together, and then for rescue, right? If anything bad happens, and so I think that bond, the bond that I have with my ski mountaineering partners is arguably some of the strongest bonds I have, right? It's a really powerful bond that is hard to acquire in today's societal structure, I would say, to put it in a soft way. It is more tribal. And I know that one of the reasons that military people have a hard time when they come back to the real world after combat is nobody has your back like that anymore, right? When you're there, you have each other's back like that. And it's so amazing and it's so profound and it's real love. A love that a lot of people might not even get to because your life depends on that person and their life depends on you. And then you come back to the real world and everybody's just blasé and nobody's relying on each other in that way. And we get some of that in the mountains, and I think it's really profound. And it's nice that we might not get some of the negative effects because in general you can go back and do it again. Hey, let's try to do something again next week if we can. And so I think that's the positive side of it. And then obviously the negative side is when shit goes wrong. So obviously in the military, shit goes wrong and people are traumatized. In the mountains, shit goes wrong and people are traumatized. I see it all the time. I'm one of them. You're one of them. I know we've all had people get injured and killed with us or without us in the mountains. The mountains take a lot of our friends, unfortunately. And so that PTSD is also something I think that we can draw parallels to with the military. And I'm curious on your thoughts on those sides of the bonding and the PTSD.
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that in. I went down the dark hole of.
No, I like that you went
I
more
really
down
like.
more like the physicality of it, which I'd never thought about.
Yeah, no, I really like what you brought back in there, and just remembering the ski tribe, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that is really legitimate. Like the people that you spend time in the mountains with that have your back. Like I can speak toward like I've gone and worked at the same company as Dan Van for a number of years because
Mm-hmm.
you know he's part of my tribe, right?
You're bonded to him.
I would ski whatever he wants to ski and
Mm-hmm.
he'll ski whatever I want to ski and we can work together, like we got each
Mm-hmm.
other's back and so I really, I think that is a real parallel. And then the other parallel is like, there's things that you have control over and that you can prepare for.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to have team members who are so dedicated to having their gear dialed and having their systems dialed and having their, their mental mindset dialed, because you're dealing with uncertainty and you can't rule all of that out, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
similar to the military where they've got their kits tight, I've taught a number of courses to special forces and different military groups, and I'm always just blown away at how good they are at rescue and at group management and at movement together as a team. Like, it is amazing watching how they move as a tribe, right? And it's just that, right? Like, you got to have your stuff dialed and everybody's paying attention because their life depends on it, right?
That's huge. And you mentioned to me before too, what the cumulative effects of Avalanche experience or Avalanche professionals experience. So, and I think we were referring to some of the negative effects. And what do you think? You mentioned before, it might just be as simple as that uncertainty every day. It can just wear you down. But yeah, what other cumulative effects might Avalanche professionals experience?
It could lead to laughter and joy.
Yeah, right. There we go. We're on a better track now.
Yeah, and just stoke, right? Like,
yeah,
say you come back, like you come back from a day of skiing or a trip to Alaska or a trip to wherever, I that feeds me for another 7-10 months, right? And those visceral experiences, like you can remember the sound of your bindings clicking on top of that one run, right? And you can remember the, whatever it is, like the infinite details in those.
You can remember the sound the snow made, and you can remember the shape of the crystals on the surface of the snow that day.
Yeah. So I think, like the long-term cumulative effects, I think the world would be in a lot better situation if more people went and skied and had fun.
Yes, or whatever it was that they were passionate about, right?
Yeah.
And I love the idea that you brought up earlier about psychological first aid. So I guess first of all, this is not something I've heard much about. What is psychological first aid?
So I was first introduced to it from one of the survivors of one of the forest fire burn flashovers, where he, deployed his shelter and his other team members didn't make it.
Oh, wow.
And he had been, pretty traumatized by that experience, obviously, but then he was teaching psychological first aid, and I'm not like an ambassador or understand it fully, but there are certain, you can Google it and look up different courses online and stuff. But it's basically taking care of each other, right? And being aware of that. Like, and one way that you mentioned earlier is, if you can be vulnerable as a guide or as a person, like oftentimes other people will open up, right? Like, all it takes is somebody to take that first step, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's an example of the psychological first aid, is just being, if you share like, hey, I'm kind of off today, this happened, my dog got run over or whatever, like, people are like, oh yeah, that sucks. Here's what, like, and just allowing people a platform to, process any of this stuff. Right. And then, different, like you can escalate it to different levels. Like, I mean, I was up at the Stevens Pass Ski Patrol last year, and they had like a board where they're, each employee put a little thing on a board of like where they were mentally, emotionally, physically, kind of where they're doing. And then they could look at like where the whole patrol was. And then also like where like individual people were, so if you get in like a big storm cycle, like the Utah teams last year, they were just getting beat down, 900 inches, and they're running out of ammo, and avalanches are closing the road, and Miles just wants to ski powder, and and they're like, beat down mentally, physically, emotionally, right? And so then, when we get beat down, how do we revive? How do we, practice some self-care? If we can't implement that self-care ourselves, how can we seek counseling or other resources
Mhm.
to correct that? I think counseling's a lot more open, obviously, nowadays.
Oh yeah.
And people could see it as like being a weakness, or it's like, there's really high functioning adults who have a counselor once a week because they want to become better functioning adults, right? And
Hmm.
better people. So
Hmm.
that's kind of the wandering version of psychological first aid, but
And I think it's
just
critical.
some topics. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's critical. And when we were talking before too, we were mentioning your a friend or acquaintance, Bruce Jameson, who's a
Mhm.
legendary Avalanche professor, I think I'd call him, wrote a book and all of it.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how there's somewhere around a six-fold increase in mental health and suicide rate in Avalanche workers. And I don't have data to back this up, so we're just talking here. But
Yeah.
I'm curious if you could speak to that, because I think that's a huge thing.
Yeah. And he said that up in a course, and I've like tried to research it and find out where that stat came from. And
Hmm.
I just didn't have time to track them down.
Hmm.
But it is real. And like the American Avalanche Association, they have a resilience project that's specifically dealing with mental health issues for avalanche professionals, right?
Hmm.
And so they have a directory for resources for folks. So at a professional level, the AAA is addressing that. Bruce is out of the Canadian program, and he was a professor at University of Calgary there, and doing the snow science program there. But they had things like, if you were driving back from the field and you were tired and you needed to get a hotel, they would never question you stopping and getting a hotel.
That's great.
I'm like, brilliant. How many people are like trying to make it home,
Yes.
exhausted from days in the field, and don't want to stay at a Holiday Inn or whatever, right? And they're
Right.
like, hey, we're going to cover your costs because you are important, right?
Yeah, we want you to survive.
Yeah. I'll track down Bruce and see where that stat came from, because I don't know
Mhm.
exactly where it is from, but I've known folks who have had trouble with managing the uncertainty. There's been storm cycles where, I've definitely been beat down as well, right?
Oh
So
yeah. Oh yeah. No, it gets intense, and we could go into all kinds of angles, but even if Bruce's numbers aren't fully accurate, we do know that the Intermountain West is the suicide belt of the US. We have more suicides per capita in this region than anywhere else in all of the USA. And the only other place that has higher rates is Alaska. And that's what I think is interesting. It almost is a corroboration, right? Because they experience a lot of what we're experiencing out here in the West, being a little bit isolated. A lot of people have moved away from their families. They're not as connected as they were. And then we also know that drugs and alcohol come into this. So drugs and alcohol are definitely a problem. And there's a lot of access to firearms. It's the number one choice for suicide for a lot of people. The tool is firearms for most men. And yeah, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on where drugs and alcohol fit into the mental health conversation with Avalanche professionals.
for sure. Yeah, no, I think I'm glad you're bringing that in there. When I started ski patrolling, it was a real culture of drug and alcohol use.
Oh yeah,
It still is in a lot of programs. Um,
definitely.
you know, I grew up in Eugene in the 80s, and it was like, it was kind of a drug and alcohol mecca with the university there and the Grateful
Oh
Dead and
yeah.
all that stuff. Drugs can free you or enslave you, right?
Hmm.
And I think that for a lot of folks, they use it to numb what's underneath. Either it's too much to deal with, or one of the things that's amazing to me is, I guess, backing up. So about 12 years ago, I stopped drinking and smoking pot.
Congratulations.
Yeah. It was mostly just like not wanting to bring that around my family. I didn't feel like I had like major issues with it. but I just wanted it to be more clear. And it was like, I don't have time for this. And I also was feeling that like alcohol was like weighing my legs down the next day when I went skiing.
Oh,
Yada,
yeah.
yada. So, and then, like a friend of mine pointed out, like, if you're high, you are not actually present with your kid.
Mm-hmm.
They won't be able to pinpoint what that is, but they know you're not there
Right.
entirely. Right. And I was like, whoa, okay.
That hit.
Yeah, that hit. I'm like, I want to be present, right? So for me, it's been a great journey of feeling better, and growth has gone exponential from there. Just working on other things, right? I think
That's
I really
great.
was like, not dealing with the subconscious and conscious things that happened earlier in my life, right? And I saw how the Leavenworth community, we had a number of avalanche fatalities in a row, and people would how the community dealt with it as a whole was getting drunk, and
Really?
yeah, and dealing with that, right? Like that was how they were dealing with trauma and grief, and it didn't seem like a real long-term strategy for dealing with it. So,
and we know it's not. We know it leads to depression and potentially suicide, especially in the Intermountain West.
yeah.
And that was a good segue. I would like to talk, briefly here about loss in the mountains, and because you were explaining how you had 5 people perish in 3 years. You guys had the Tunnel Creek avalanche. What kind of loss have you experienced in the mountains, and how many people have you lost, and what have you learned?
Yeah, I think in Alaska, I remember being involved in a full burial up there where we dug a guy out.
Whoa.
And we were skiing. It was like terrible hard slab conditions, but the clients were there and it was clear, and we were just looking for like smooth snow to ski. Everything else was like volcanic sastrugi, and but he triggered a little hard slab and got buried. And I remember him saying the skiing wasn't even fucking worth it.
Oh no, that's pivotal right there.
And I was like, noted. Okay.
Yeah.
But when we lived outside of Leavenworth,
Which is in Washington.
Yeah, in Washington, Leavenworth, Washington, up Icicle Canyon, and we lived in a little cabin, and our closest neighbor was another friend of mine, Z, and he was young, really athletic, really talented. He was my daughter's first friend.
Oh, wow.
She would ride like her 3-wheeler down to his house, like little big wheel.
I love those.
Yeah. Really just a gem of a human being. And we were skiing together a lot, skiing in the mountains there. And but he was kind of in the next generation skiing, and those guys were going really skiing some interesting stuff. It was great. And I remember the week of the accident that, like, we snowmobiled in and out of our houses, and we were at, we were at the trailhead meeting, and he was just so alive, and he was just like talking about this run he skied, and I was just like, whoa, and it's something I had looked at, and then he went and skied it. I told him about it, and I was like, right on, good for him.
Yeah.
But anyway, a couple of days later, he got caught in an avalanche, and it took him through some trees, and it was pretty dangerous conditions. So, like, the folks who were with him tried to revive him and help him. The helicopter tried to land. They couldn't land. It got dark, and we went back the next day. There were a number of things that stood out to me, and one of them was the destructive forces. We found his leg, not me specifically, but his leg ripped out of his hip socket, like,
whoa,
the following spring.
No.
Like 15 feet up in a tree.
Oh, God.
With a ski boot and a ski still attached to it.
Oh.
Yeah.
So when for our listeners, when you mentioned earlier that explosives and avalanches have similar results, what you meant was similar results on the human body.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that was the first, friend that I got to take out of the mountains in a sled, in a body bag.
So sorry.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Not a super gnarly steep slope or anything. It just had the consequences of the terrain trap of trees in the run out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And something that we can overlook is you hit the trees and they're pretty unforgiving. So, and the one of the tragic things was like, he was young.
Right. How old?
He was like 20.
Oh, really young.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, that hit pretty hard. We obviously the next winter was the Tunnel Creek Avalanche. And I was working with Jim Jack in the summers, and Johnny Brennan was a good friend of mine. And then Chris was the ambassador of Stoke.
Rudolph, right?
What's that?
Chris Rudolph.
Yeah. And I was in the mountains that day. It was a crazy high avalanche hazard day. And, but it was also deep powder. Everybody was having fun. And and so there was those two back to back. And then the third year, a woman, Ellie, lost her life, a mother of two young kids. Right. And so
also avalanche.
Yeah. So Leavenworth took a beating on the avalanche front there. And,
what years were those?
2011, 12, 13.
Okay.
Yeah. But back to your point as well of like how, people are coping with it, right? Like we all kind of, there was counseling, there was alcohol, there was drugs, but I think that, for the parents and the close relatives, you're not going to ever get over that, right?
No.
But you can become lighter on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can, do work to become lighter in the world with it. So, and I don't think that alcohol helps with that. It stays in you, right? You're just suppressing that, and it'll come out later with, anger or disease or whatever, right?
No, I encourage our listeners to look up numbing behaviors. There's lots of them, even just using your phone, drinking, drugs,
food.
Sometimes food, TV. There's all kinds of things you can do to avoid processing traumatic events in your life, even sub-traumatic events in your life, right? Events that aren't as traumatic as what we're talking about here. But I think this, especially the story you just told about your young friend, really can drive home to our listeners that yes, the type of PTSD that can be experienced by avalanche professionals and guides and people who travel the mountains can be very similar to what military people experience. That there's a lot of mental health and suicide problems in the Intermountain West because of this, right? Because of some of the things we experience out there, and some of these tools that I really encourage everybody to look into can be really helpful, like the Hero's Journey Foundation. So, and there's more too, and if somebody's really having a hard time, look up those crisis hotlines for suicide and whatnot. But there are tools, there are communities, there's people out there who want to help you. So that's one of the big points here. And and we're just trying to draw out stories and draw out experiences and show people what can happen out here in the mountains, and how heavy it really can be, and how much it can change people's lives, and change your life, change the people around you's life, and change the lives of an entire community.
For sure. Yeah. And I think one other thing that people can do that's not really proactive is, take those wilderness first responder courses, have a good med kit, or take a stop the bleed course, have those tourniquets handy, because the destructive forces of avalanches, are legit, right?
Truly legit. Yeah, I know some of the big things that you carry in your my first aid kit that are scary, but they're important. I have a mask to help with CPR and give myself a little isolation from that person, and then tourniquet, if there really is the potential loss of a limb, or some severe arterial bleeding. So we keep going down these dark, sad roads, but I think it's good. And this is going to be the last one for our listeners. I'd be interested to hear some of your avalanche stories, because I know you've had some close calls, and what you learned from it and how it changed you.
There's been a number of avalanches involvements, and I've gotten pretty lucky. But the one that stands out the most was, when we think back to like avalanche education and like those human factors, right? And you're thinking about like, oh, familiarity, and acceptance and, commitment and different, of the human side of relationships and stuff really played into the incident, right?
Always.
So across the street from my house or my cabin in the Icicle Canyon outside of Leavenworth, Washington, was this amazing like couloir. It's about 2,700 feet in the rocks. Whoa. And I looked at that and I was like, we got to go ski that. And so my buddy had just come back from Europe, and he had been skiing all the wild stuff in Europe, and I'd come back from Alaska and thinking I was all Alaska guy, and we had a photographer with us.
A little camera courage.
Well, and the interesting thing with the photographer is like we had butted heads before on route finding, which played into the trip later on, because I had planned out a route where we kind of went up around the backside of this mountain, and then we could drop into the couloir. There was like 2 inches of new with some wind loading. And I'm thinking, 2 inches of new, we'll cut a little bit of wind pocket at the top. We brought a short rope to cut the wind pocket, and then we'll drop in and ski this. And, we started up in there and got a ways up there, and the photographer was like, hey, why don't we just take that line straight up to the ridge, on the front side? And it looked pretty good, it was like mostly in the trees. And, for sake of not arguing with him again, we said, great. Got within about 200 feet of the ridge, and it kind of cliffed us out. And at that point, we switched to boot packing, which was super helpful because my helmet was on my pack, and I ended up putting my helmet on my head, my skis on my back, and we're post holing up here. And the last little crux, we had to like go out into this little pocket, little face to get to the ridge. And so, we'll do it one at a time. So I'm out in front, the other guys are back in a safe spot, and I'm walking out there, and each step it got deeper. It was like 6 inches. Then it was like 8 inches. Couple more steps, it was like 10 inches. And I'm like, ooh, this is getting deeper. And really steep. And I'm like, oh, it's just, I got like 10 more steps to make it to this ridge, and I remember looking back at my partners and going, should I just run back there or walk back to where they're at, or should I go to the ridge? I was like, I looked back and I hesitated. I took one more step, and the whole bowl ripped out, little pocket, and really steep area. So the first little tree I tried to grab, and that didn't work. And the second tree I hit with my face, but luckily my helmet like glanced off of it. But right away I knew I was like bleeding. And my buddy was watching, and he said, he is a smoke jumper, and he said, I reached free fall speeds right away.
Just boom.
Yeah, because it was like 50 degrees, just like trying to get up to this ridge, and accelerated. And then I started like tomahawking. And I'm like, oh, this is good. Skis on the pack, and I'm tomahawking. And fortunately, I came around and my leg punched through the crust and hung up, and it blew out my knee, but the snow went past me. It gave me that like millisecond or half a second or a sec, I don't know, but it gave me enough time to get out of the flow. And that snow like went into dense trees and would have shredded me, like my buddy got shredded a couple of years later. So, but there I was, had to ski out with blown knee. And but interesting enough, sometimes my knee will hurt and I'm like, oh man, that saved my life.
Yeah, right.
So I'm like, oh, my knee's a little sore, but I'm alive, you know? So, looking back, it was some of those classic lessons, right? Like of being in a group and making choices based on that, on the group, and commitment and familiarity of looking at this thing, and really underestimating that like 2 inches of new snow with steady wind loading can be 15-inch pocket near a ridge top, and if you don't plan your route right, and it can catch you off guard, right? So
Well, I'm so glad you're okay. Thanks for sharing. And I know you've had other experiences, but I think that one takes the cake. That's about as heavy as it gets. And so I'm so glad you're okay. But yeah, what a profound experience.
it was pretty fun. I went back and skied it by myself a
Oh,
couple
you
years
do
later.
that.
Couple years
Good. I like
later.
that. The happy
Yeah.
ending.
Yeah, a couple years later, I was like, I didn't even tell my wife where I was going. I just went and skied it. And I was like,
Well, yeah,
I
gosh,
just kind of wanted to like, just do it and not have any of the,
some closure, right?
yeah, yeah.
Nice. Well, and again, these experiences lead to a lot of challenges that I think these personal growth type workshops and things can really help with. The idea of vulnerability can really help with, and us just being open and friendly and lovely with each other, it can really help with. And so I appreciate you sharing all this and sharing some good solutions for where, what this kind of trauma can lead to, how important it is to be on top of it when we're in the avalanche terrain. And hearing and learning from your experiences and your stories is just very, very useful, very powerful in my mind. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is your very important highway avalanche forecaster career. So you've been doing this for 12 years, and you've been working for the Washington Department of Transportation's Avalanche Department, and you were just promoted. So congratulations on Avalanche Supervisor, I think, of the North Central region. Is that right?
That's affirmative. Yep.
And you're already on radio talk. And so, just, which is, I'm sure, a huge part of your job. So just tell us, what exactly do you do? What is your job? What does Avalanche Supervisor do?
Yeah. So, I don't know what I do now because I'm an avalanche supervisor.
Well, I guess let's
had
take
the job for a couple weeks. No, I'm just kidding. I'm
take
kidding.
a step back then. No, take a step. What have you been doing?
Yeah, I mean, we manage the risk for the traveling public and for our maintenance crews, right?
And you do that by shooting howitzers or
so
not knocking avalanches down.
Yeah, so it's a year-round position. There's like getting ready for winter and avalanches, and then actually at this time of year, our work starts to get a little more streamlined when we're just start focusing on risk management and treatment options for avalanche, right? Mm-hmm. And so a big part of the fall is we're doing a lot of outreach and multi-agency courses. Like on Friday, we have a big highway avalanche search and rescue all day event where we bring in like all the players in the corridor, state patrol and ambulance and fire and ski area, and we all just get together in the same area and practice.
So there's got to be so many people involved.
Yeah. So and just giving people the right tools and the skills if they show up first on a scene, or if they show up and there's an incident already going on, and they can we insert into that operation in a helpful way, right? Mm-hmm. And some of the risk management strategies to keep them safe. And then we're doing morning and afternoon snow and weather observations. We're looking at all the the outlook models and everything in the short term and in the long term. We have 3 primary areas. So North Cascades Highway is a seasonal highway. It closes seasonally. If you've never been up there, it opens in the spring, and it's phenomenal ski touring for everybody. Great camping on the east side of the mountains. Amazing ski touring. But it just closed a week ago. We kept it open a little longer than normal.
Great.
It's a beautiful spot. But so we forecast for avalanches, anticipating when we get into avalanche season there's some really steep unsupported slopes that come right to the deck, and so it doesn't take a whole lot of snow to cause problems there. And And then in the spring, we go in there with the maintenance crews and open it up with snow blowers and excavators and all that stuff, and mitigate any hazard before we open it up to the public. But in the winter, primarily avalanche problem is Tumwater Canyon, which is just west of Leavenworth, and then Stevens Pass on US 2 there. And interesting, Stevens Pass history, the Wellington disaster in 1910.
The biggest avalanche disaster in U.S. history. It's like 110 people.
In U.S. history, yeah. It
was a train, right?
Yep, a train got hit there.
Wow.
So interesting enough, our howitzer building is right down in the town of Wellington.
Wow.
So, that whole history is there. And so the mountains can produce some pretty large and destructive avalanches in the conditions we get. So we have an area called Old Faithful where, once we get rolling into the winter, that we do regular active mitigation with explosives. We've got, the howitzer programs are phasing out. The weapons are pretty old, 80 years old. The support and the knowledge to maintain those is waning. And the Army's asked us to find alternative solutions and to implement them. UDOT has a bunch of rack systems. Alta just phased out their howitzer. So it's there's no set date, but people are working towards that way and coming up with exit strategies. So we have some remote avalanche control systems that we put in the last couple of years that we can call up from the roadside and ask them to, pick what shot we want to shoot and shoot them, and then move on. And then we also have bomb trams that we access with a snowcat up on the starting zones. And so we'll use large explosives, 55-pound bags of AMPHO and link together with det cord and trigger avalanches in a controlled environment. So the idea is
for our listeners, sorry to interrupt, 55 pounds versus what is a ski patroller? What's a hand charge?
Typical hand charge is like 1 kilo, which is 2.2.
Okay. So these are massive. Yeah. So this is,
yeah.
Okay. So this is 20 times what a ski patroller is throwing around.
We're not trying to keep the slopes nice for skiing. So trying to knock a lot of snow off the mountain. And close the highway, it impacts the traveling public. But if we can close the highway and release avalanches, and then open the highway back up. So, from the highway perspective, it's interesting forecasting because the highway never sleeps. So you're 24/7 avalanche forecasting. And there's a lot of pressure to keep it open. And, like in guiding, you can have avalanche problems where, okay, I'm going to change my terrain selection because we have this avalanche problem, right? Whereas that terrain and the highway corridors are always there. You can't take the sneak route down the down the avalanche train because the avalanche train is still there. And then the other interesting thing about forecasting is outside of the general areas where we control all the time, there's a number of, we have about 140 avalanche paths. There's a number of them that are infrequent. And you're dealing with natural avalanche releases often. And so forecasting, these large, infrequent natural avalanches is quite tricky, right? So you gotta have good data. You gotta have lots of it, which, requires going into the field and getting some data, which isn't always bad.
So what have you learned working on the highway world that you maybe didn't learn in the heli-ski guiding world, or just how do those knowledge sets complement and influence each other?
On the highway, we're a really small part of a huge organization, which is the Department of Transportation. So we're just this little teeny part of it, right?
How big is your team?
3 full-time employees in the winter and 4 on calls.
And then Washington DOT is Hundreds, I'm assuming.
5,000 people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Continue.
Yeah, because it's ferries and everything else, right?
Everything.
So yeah, we're a real small part of that organization, and you have to coordinate with other groups within that organization. We get you get a lot of the glory of, oh, you guys are the Avalanche guys, you got to shoot the big guns, yada yada yada. And a lot of times we come in, we make a huge mess, and someone else has to clean that mess up, right?
Clear the road.
Yeah, and they don't get any love. We're all like the reporters want to talk to the Avalanche guys, and it's like, you should be talking to the guys who are cleaning up, guys and gals who are cleaning up the road, right?
Right.
So that's an interesting part. The similarities. We have a big geographical range where we do have different snow climates or different microclimates. So we, similar to like heli-skiing, you can fly over a ridge and it might be more maritime in one area and more intermountain in another area and more continental somewhere else. And to some extent, we have that in our region, which is real interesting as well. So we could have 2 different or 3 different avalanche forecasts going on depending on the zone and the snowpack structure. And it's I would say the stability of working for a big organization, state organization, for raising a family, getting a 401k or your retirement and paid time off and all that stuff is a lot different than the guiding world, right?
Oh yeah.
Those are some of the parallels and differences. Lots of really interesting technology that's coming down the pipes as well. So if you're keened up, where the drones are going, we're using drones to do, snowpack depth and distribution with photogrammetry and LiDAR. They're looking into drones to deploy explosives. That's kind of, obviously they're doing it at the military level, but we're working towards that. And then these remote systems are in place. There's lots of snowpack modeling and weather data gathering software and tools. A lot of avalanche detection tools as well, like radar and infrasound and different things like that. And so it's a real, if you're into technology and innovation and continuous learning, it's a really, really good environment for that.
That sounds fascinating. And hopefully, the way it usually works is, the military develops these technologies, then they find, civilian uses. And right now the government's using some of this and developing some of this with you guys, it sounds like. And then hopefully someday it makes it into the guiding world and even just the regular consumer world. Because, I do think there's a lot of technology that we need in avalanche situations. Like there seems like there's got to be better ways than just these little avalanche beacons and all this crap we have. Like there's going to be better technologies, and hopefully they just probably already exist, and they just need to come down in price and or get released by the government, declassified. So I am really hopeful to hear what you're saying, and there are things are getting better, even just snowpack modeling and stuff like that. This is the kind of stuff that could end up on an app someday, and you could wake up in the morning and really get an in-depth look into specifically, more specificity into little regional pockets of what the avalanche danger is doing. And I do think in 20 years from now, we're going to be safer because of the technology. And that's really exciting to hear what you guys are seeing in your worlds.
Yeah, we were just at the ISSW in Bend, which is International Snow Science Workshop. And it's 5 days, people from around the world, and that snowpack modeling in those apps, they are implementing them now.
Great.
Yeah. So like in places like Canada and Switzerland, like the modeling and they're linked to weather stations, and they're just the machine learning, they're continually improving the outputs of these models as well. So pretty fascinating, yeah, hopefully.
Really exciting. I went to the ISS, the International Snow Science Workshop, when it was in Squaw Valley a long time ago. I want to say 2010, and you were probably there. And man, I learned so much. It was just phenomenal. And I kind of swore I'll always go to these, and that's the only one I've been to. So I need to start going to them more because the learning there is incredible. One of the last questions I had here was you mentioned on the phone that now that you're the Avalanche supervisor, you'd like to change some things and do some things differently. What might be some of your ideas for changing operations where you work?
Yeah, so I'm, fortunately, I'm getting to build on a good program, right? Like we're not, it's not broken. But there are some things that, as the passing of the guard goes, bringing in some of the risk management strategies and assessment that we do in the guiding world, right? And so it's really not groundbreaking and more industry standards. Of just bringing this program into that world, right? So
terrific integration.
Yeah, better risk assessment. I'd like to see more data gathering and quality of data and quantity of data, and then being able to interpret that as well. We're actually hiring, filling my position, so that job just opened today.
Wow, great.
For 2 weeks. So I
hope you get someone terrific.
Yeah, I don't know when the podcast is coming out, but if it comes out,
it'll come out in January, so it might be a little late. But
it's going to be a little late for that.
Yeah, but if it's still open, call Harlan.
Yeah, there's small stuff like integrating. This year we're still using the howitzer, so like I integrated some of the folks from a different region who are on the maintenance team, but they've been around the howitzer for years. I invited them to gun school so they can be part of our gun team. Right. Cool. So they're just integrating that team there. We've been doing these multi-agency trainings, continue to build on that. Working with the InfoX and data sharing platform. And then the big project, we did a poster at ISSW with some folks out of Canada doing this photogrammetry with drones, and that's really neat to see where that's going. So
I love your emphasis on data, because NASA's unofficial motto, what they have written up when you come into work, is "In God we trust, all others bring data." I think that's that it can be problematic too, right? Because you don't want to take away reason. And so when they talk about the Challenger explosion, they think that reason might have gone to the wayside. But I do love that. In God we trust, all others bring data. So I do like your data emphasis, because that's where the real learning happens.
And I think too, coming back to like when we have guide meetings in Alaska, right? Like everybody's sharing their opinions, and we want to come up with the best decision, not consensus, right?
Yep.
And that can be really tricky. And so having, if you have good data, it can reduce some of that uncertainty. And if you can reduce some of the uncertainty, then you can focus on what you don't know and deal with that, right?
And speaking of those guide meetings in Alaska, I learned a lot in those guide meetings in Alaska from you. And sometimes I do feel like the rate of learning when I'm, with, in guide teams isn't what I'd hope it would be. And, one of the reasons we're having this talk today is I learned a lot from you, Harlan. So I want to say thank you before I forget for that. And the few times, I challenged you or you asked for dissent from me, those were the times I learned the most. So keep doing that. Keep pushing your people on your teams to do that, because that's what I really took away. Was my biggest learning points in the last year in the guiding world came from you pushing me to dissent. And so the last question kind of is, what's next for you? What's next for you in your journey, Harlan?
Yeah. So like you said, this position is new at work. Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how it goes. The next part of the journey that I've been working on a lot is family. I really, if you want to see a timeline, have kids, because they just are like,
oh man,
growing up so fast, right? And so spending as much time as I can with my kids, and I fortunately share like similar values and ideas with my wife in terms of like, just trying to facilitate, like that passion for whatever direction they want to go. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And not in a way of spoiling them. I mean, they do like all kinds of farm chores and everything and work hard, but like, like it's a crazy time for kids to be growing up.
Internet and cell phones.
Yeah. Internet and cell phones. And so, I spend a lot of time, hunting with my son, super fun. He's 10 years old.
Great.
Yeah. He just got his first elk.
Ooh, congrats.
Yeah. He is amazing little man, and but super fun just to be in the mountains with, super fun to ski with. Like skiing with a 10-year-old is
hilarious,
rad.
Yeah.
Everything's like a video game and little cheap airs everywhere.
Oh yeah.
I do like skiing with my daughter, but now she wants to ski with her friends more. So
oh yeah, she's getting older.
Yeah. But so, really enjoying family. This year I want to surf more.
Yes.
It's I didn't start surfing when I was young, but I really enjoy it. And it's a I don't know, something about wearing flip-flops and the simplicity of just having not so much stuff as we go skiing with.
Oh yeah, I agree. And the healing power of the ocean. Oh my gosh, there's something real magic about it.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that. And then, continuing to develop, more, be involved in more spiritual, personal growth, workshop endeavors. So,
and as that develops, keep me posted, because I want to do one with you or one that you're providing. So keep us posted on that, because I'm very curious, and I think that you're the right person for that job.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. There's some other folks that we did one this last year on a river trip, and it was a really neat river journey. And a friend of mine came over from Germany who's an amazing facilitator, and and then we ended up at the ocean and went surfing afterwards. So it was pretty well rounded.
Sounds perfect.
But yeah. That stuff brings me alive. And it's very interesting, right? That it's just going into that unknown where anything is possible, right? And you just can't make things up. It's just like being in the mountains where, like, if you stop and look around, it's like, wow, you can't make this up.
Mm-hmm. So. Well, the journey that you took me on in that burial exercise took me inside of myself, places that I hadn't been. So I think that's sort of the goal with some of this personal growth stuff, right? Is to discover new parts of yourself, new strengths in yourself, and to shed things away that you don't need anymore. So thank you for that. And Harlan, that's all I got for you, man. Do you have any other thoughts you'd like to share here at the end of the show?
No, this has just been great. It's been a really enjoyable conversation with you, Miles, and I hope to ski with you again in Alaska this spring. We'll see how personnel and the winter shapes up here, just being in this new position. But if not, I'm sure we'll get out and get after it. And if you make it out to Stevens Pass direction this winter, we can definitely go skiing here.
I'm going to come crash on your couch, and I demand you come back to Alaska. Harlan, thank you so much for all your time today. And thanks for being here, and have a great rest of the day.
Okay. See you later, Miles.
Thank you so much for listening to the SnowBrains podcast. If you liked this podcast, please share with your friends and family, and please subscribe. To find out more about SnowBrains, please visit us at snowbrains.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at SnowBrains.
Ditch the hassle and embrace the freedom of an all-inclusive ski vacation with Club Med. Their resorts in the European Alps and Canada offer the perfect blend of exhilarating skiing, exceptional service, and worry-free pampering. Enjoy having lift tickets, delicious meals, lessons for all ages, and endless après-ski fun, all included in one price. While the kids are having a blast at the supervised children's clubs, you can focus on mastering your skiing skills and creating unforgettable memories on and off the slopes. Visit www.clubmed.us or call 1-800-CLUB-MED or call your travel advisor to experience skiing without limits. This episode of the SnowBrains podcast was edited by Jared White and Ben Hout. Music by Chad Crouch. I'm your host, producer, and creator, Miles Clark.